this is Kiz from Glowitheflow podcast. I run Hip Hop Heals, a non-profit that explores hip hop and its therapeutic powers. And today we've got somebody who also does that from across the pond, whose name is Dr. Ian Levy. So, Dr. Levy, could you tell us a bit about what you do, please?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Dr. Ian Levy. I'm an associate professor in the counseling and therapy department at Manhattan College, where I'm a professor. Soon to be the chair of the department, actually, which I'm super stoked about. And then I'm also an artist. I rap and make music. Just put out a project recently. And the last thing about me is my work combines both of those identities, right? How do I sort of bring my love for and my passion for hip hop into my work directly with young people, but also in the training of future counseling professionals?
Amazing. How do you come to this work?
Through, I could talk forever about this, but really through originally my parents. I'm a son of a jazz musician and an opera singer, and so music's always been part of my life. I found hip hop in my early days, and when I was really sort of developing as a person and trying to figure myself out, and hip hop offered me pathways to learn more about myself, and so my love for and I think experiential understanding of hip hop has informed now how I engage with folks to hopefully allow them to utilize and tap into hip hop in the same capacity that I've seen it help me and others that I've worked with.
And what do you enjoy most about your job?
I think when you do hip hop therapy related work, you kind of get to be multiple versions of yourself all at once, right? So I love that I get to still be a rapper, right? I'm finishing up the semester at my college and getting promoted, but also dropping an album, right? I love that I can kind of be all these things at once. I can rap about being a father also and a partner, and I can kind of bring all of myself to where I am. And there's a lot of flexibility in I guess the work that I do. And then I love seeing other people start to utilize hip hop in the same way, to share their stories, to figure themselves out, to chart their own paths.
Wow. So how do you know a good therapeutic workshop has happened? What are the indicators?
Well, you're asking some good questions that I think I could respond to in many ways with a lot of depth, but to sort of be straightforward, I mean, I apply a very traditional research lens to a lot of my evaluation, right? So I use mixed methods research. I think pre-post surveys that look at growth on specific outcomes that you want to measure. I've done a lot around stress, anxiety, and depression pre-post. That's been really helpful. And then also qualitative data, focus groups with youth, meeting with the people that are proximal to youth. When I talk to young people's parents about changes that they've seen in their children after working with somebody who specializes in hip-hop based approaches is a really powerful indicator. Also talking with other school staff, teachers, administrators, but in more focus group or interview format, where you're really then analyzing what it is that they're saying, developing themes or strands that are important from those dialogues. So I think having actual verbal communication with folks, as well as getting more quantitative, survey-based results, are how I generally know it's effective. The only other thing I'll say is sometimes when you hear a product that a young person has presented, and if you have an opportunity for them to share that out through something like a listening party or whatever, you can hear young people speak about themselves and share their music, and sometimes you can just feel the impact, right? In this really visceral way. You can see a young person develop. You can observe them develop from this more maybe shy, reserved person to really come out of their shell, or to explore parts of themselves and use different language to communicate who they are than they used prior. So there's other ways to document growth beyond the more traditional. I just come from a research background, so I'm oftentimes deploying more formal research methods to understand that development or that impact.
Yeah, I think we need all of them. If we have a rainbow variety of approaches, we can do things that are tailored and suitable for the audiences. Because I'm working with people who quite often have researcher fatigue, and
Yeah.
they're sick of people coming in and going, "Oh, you're from the community. Oh,
Yeah.
let's do this research on you." And then it's
Yeah.
like, "Oh God, I don't want to go through this again." You're just gonna come in and then you're gonna bugger off, and then nothing's changed. You're just sort
Yeah.
of getting funding. So in the actual workshop itself, when you're standing there before you've done any evaluation, or after or before any pre-post surveys have happened, what gives you the sort of feeling in here that a good workshop's happened? When you're just standing like human to human and you're like, whoa, that's landed really well with that person, but you can't put a label on it. Like, hey, what are those things that make you feel, oh, this is going really well?
I think you can feel it, right? Like, one of my favorite things about hip hop based work is like, you come into a room, you don't know anybody, particularly in a workshop space. I'm saying workshop because I'm imagining it's a group space, right? If I come into a group and and I'm feeling everybody out and they're all feeling me out, they may be feeling each other out, right? There's a level of discomfort that naturally exists in the room, that in that uncertainty, that not knowing. And I find that sometimes, like, a simple like cipher activity to open something up, right? Getting everybody to collectively make a beat, maybe having people write some like just quick, like free, like just jot down like four lines about who they are and share that out in a cipher. That by actually like engaging in this practice, the mood in the room like immediately shifts, right? Close ties are built. You can feel it. There's almost like a warmth, right? It's palpable what you can feel within the room. And that's often, right, when I know that things have landed the right way. It's an intuition, right? I think it's a feeling. There's moments where, like, I was in my graduate class last week. I was in a cipher, and we had a freestyle artist come, and this one person like dropped a line that was so good that I wasn't the only one to have this reaction, but a few of us, like, I literally, like, I started jumping up and down and like spinning around, right? Like, I was jumping and spinning in like threes, and never have I done that in a college classroom ever in my life. But like, it was a cipher, and it was the energy of it, right, caused me to have this visceral reaction. Like, in my body, I had to jump and move, and that's how I know it works, right? That's how I know the feelings. And you see that when you look at ciphers and when you go to spaces, you can watch people be impacted, right, by hip hop. And I don't know if that answers the question fully, but
Yeah,
I think you can
yeah.
see a lot. You can see it in those ways.
So it's reminding me of when I've mixed two tunes together, and they're jungle drum and bass tunes, and there's a sick bass drop, but there's enough of a gap in that sort of sound frequency in the other tune where it allows that bass drop to happen. But there's other like jingly high frequency sounds that are going on. So when you put them together, I call it a meat and two veg tune, because it's like it's got everything you need. It's like a full dinner. Like, you've got your meat and your two veg, and it's like the two tunes are just pow. And it doesn't matter whether you like that music or not. If the two tunes go together, like, I have the jumping up and down, running around, like wanting to show other people kind of thing. And you can just see when that happens in a music workshop, whether it's hip hop or whether it's lyric writing or jazz or whatever. There's that feeling. But yeah, I think hip hop really does have a more visceral impact on us because well, that might be another podcast. Hold that thought.
Yeah 100%.
So what are the things that you have to do to make sure a workshop goes well from a practitioner point of view? So in other words, what helps you ensure good practice?
Well, so I think there's a couple things. I think remembering that the knowledge is in the room, right? Like, hip hop is effective when people bring who they are to it, right? Whether or not there are people in the room that already identify with hip hop and have like very specific skills or not, even if they don't, they have stories, they have lived experiences that are going to come to light. So I need to be able to leverage practices that allow them to tell their stories, to share their assets, to share their skills. And I think a lot of times in traditional academic spaces, right, like, the person leading the workshop is like the bearer of all the knowledge, right? Now, what I love about hip hop is it turns all that on its head, right? It's really about acknowledging the beauty and the complexities of the folks in front of you and who you're working with. I also think that there needs to be a leveraging of a specific community defined practice, right? So something that already exists or is happening within hip hop needs to be utilized. So I've done a lot of like mixtape creation work, or if I've done DJ workshops with friends, we've done a lot of like mood playlisting. And we've done these things because, well, folks are already doing that, right? That's already part of hip hop. There's already practices that are innate to hip hop culture that are being utilized outside that have some cathartic value, but aren't necessarily always used in a pointed direction towards a therapeutic outcome, right? And so what would it look like to engage a group in, if I take mood playlisting, for example, to work with a group to generate a range of different emotions that we're feeling, separate the group into small subgroups around shared feelings, create a list of shared songs around those emotions, share them out, play snippets of each, talk about what they meant for each person, right? What I'm doing here is I'm allowing people to tap into their own knowledge, their own feelings, their own, maybe the songs that they've listened to when they've had breakups or when they've gotten through a difficult situation in their life. Like they're bringing those forward. But also they're practicing something and experiencing something that happens anyway in hip hop, right? People have been making thematically aligned playlists and mixtapes on cassettes since the beginning of this whole thing, right? And so it's nothing new. It's just using something in a strategic way around a specific therapeutic outcome, right? And I think that's what makes the work great. It's realizing that, like, hey, hip hop's always been. So how do we then call on it in a strategic way to help get to a certain outcome?
I suppose there's some like devil's advocate kind of views where you might say that, and I'm not holding this view, I'm just saying that if you're a counselor, you might be raping hip hop for what you can use out of it to squeeze in your therapeutic modalities. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about things that people about hip hop enjoy.
Yes.
People who love hip hop do, and the things that sort of gives us a little, shake in our step kind of thing, spring in our step.
Yeah, I think it becomes problematic only when the authenticity of the hip hop practice is lost, right? So a lot of times in schools, for example, I'll be running a group and the school will say to me, I need you to run a group with this young, with a bunch of young women who have been fighting a lot lately. And I need you to do like an anger management group. And so now all of a sudden the expectation is that I'm going to call on hip hop to change the individuals around the mechanism that has been identified from the school that may be problematic. Who knows how the school is appraising behaviors, right? Are youth angry because there's something wrong with them, or are they angry because there's issues within the curriculum? People in the building have said so. Unless I'm attentive to that, if I'm taking hip hop and using it in a way to satisfy the means of an institution that has like racist understandings of who youth are in this example, then I will be using something really valuable like hip hop to a demonstrative end, right? But if I'm saying, no, you know what, I'm going to come here and like actually foster more self-awareness because that's what hip hop's about. I'm going to use hip hop to create community amongst people because that's what hip hop's about. Then I'm just doing what hip hop's always done, right? But it requires, I think, a savviness and an understanding of the context that you're within. Because certainly, right, hip hop is really powerful. I think a lot about like the movie, I think a lot about like Black Panther and like vibranium, right? Now I could take vibranium and I could create like weapons of mass destruction and like destroy the world with it. Or, right, I can tap into like the core of it and understand how it is used to elevate community, to bring folks together, to protect it as I utilize it and grow it with people, right? And I think hip hop in the same way, right? Hip hop is so powerful that youth gravitate towards it, that it can be used to like undo them, to minimize them, to change them, to alter them. And it looks sexy, so you might not see it. But it also can, if you're savvy enough, be used to really elevate and amplify youth's potential. And so it's a great devil's advocate position, because it's one that I think is a threat to the work broadly. And we have to always be very, very attentive to the ways that hip hop is brought into spaces and talked about.
So
yeah.
if we are coming about to this practice with our eyes wide open and our ears attuned to what's being asked of us as hip hop facilitators in the therapeutic realm, we might say to our funders, commissioners, the organizations who pay our wages or commission us to do our projects, you know what, we could do an anti-bullying session or a no smoking session or whatever, but if we flip it, let's do some public health marketing about what a body needs to thrive, and good food, clean air, fresh water and things like that. Then you can sort of go through the roots of hip hop by opening and expanding awareness and consciousness, rather than going, I want to do the Green Cross quote and how to do road safety.
Right. 100%.
Okay, so then
it's preventative.
Yeah,
it's preventative rather than reacting to a perceived detriment that's usually an individual deficit and not an acknowledgement of the systemic inequity that has allowed that quote unquote deficit to be labeled to begin with, right? And so it's like, how do we get there? And that's, by the way, what hip hop's always been, right? Like hip hop's always been about acknowledging inequities and working at a systems level. And so that, I think, yes, that is the flip. And with funders, that's always it, right? Because funders, like principals or whomever, are going to always be looking for like, well, what's the actual like outcome? And it's usually aligned with something that is deficit oriented, because a lot of our models are. And so again, we have to return, I think, to the core. And one of the best ways to do that is just to partner with community. It has to be experiential, right? Like, let me get artists in the space with me, right? Let me get a DJ to come in. Let me get a graffiti artist to come in. Let me get like people that understand the culture on just a practical level and can bring their excitement and their love for the culture to life in front of youth with me there to partner with them to keep it sort of, if I can, like glued to whatever the group goal is. But like, it's about experiencing like the fullness of the culture. And I think looking, at like this through this prevention lens is really important. I mean, particularly for my work as a school counselor, right? Like I always identify I vibe out with more preventative strategies personally, and there's space for everything, right? We need reactive things as well, but I sort of specialize in a lot of preventive strategies.
Okay, so to repeat back what I think some of the key things are that we said in this area. So you might, before a workshop can go well, you might be thinking about the cause of the workshop. How did the workshop come about, and what are the things that you're being contracted to look at? So what lens are you going to look at those things? Are you going to look at them directly, literally as a cause and effect, or are you going to sow a seed really and create conditions where somebody can sort of consciously and use their curiosity to come to the answers by themselves and look at wider, lifelong, sustainable strategies they can use to apply thinking and thought processes to sort of critically assess what they are, where they are, what they need to do, how they need to do it, rather than just boom, stop smoking, boom, anti-bullying, boom, anger management. It's more about the sort of human consciousness kind of levels. And we're also talking about, just then, the last thing that you just said was about help me out here, this is my
preventative strategies.
The preventative strategies rather than the sort of curative and reactive strategies.
Yep.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
What makes your workshop safe for you to deliver and for participants to take part?
I think that what's wonderful about hip hop practices is that they call individuals and challenge individuals to tell their stories, and they celebrate vulnerability. while at the same time not like hating on people who are not willing to open up to that degree. So I often find that there's, with a simple statement of like, you know, reflect on XYZ theme in these lyrics that you write to whatever degree feels most comfortable for you. People are invited to reflect in that way. And some people go really far, and some people like go really deep into an experience. Some people don't. But either way, it's love and it's celebrated, especially when we're in Cypher and we're in those group spaces. I also think, and this is something that I've written a bit about and studied a bit, but like ciphers in and of themselves, right, have predefined norms in them, right? Like when people are in a cipher, they already know how to not talk over each other, to listen to each other, to celebrate each other, to stand in a circle so that nobody is like demanding more attention than somebody else in a given moment, right? And so I think these kind of group norms are things that we usually as practitioners will formally state or write down on a chart paper with the goal of creating a safe and accepting environment. What's cool about hip hop is I think when done authentically, it naturally delivers those norms or allows those norms to manifest in a way that's unspoken and potentially more genuine, right? I can write down equal turns at talk or respect on a piece of paper, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those are going to be enacted. The cipher shows us how to enact them and reminds us that we know how to enact them. So yeah, those are the ways that I believe that workshops that utilize hip hop based approaches can be safe and inviting.
And following on from that, thinking about where there's a instilled competitiveness, so where you might not be in a cipher, you might be in a clash. So somebody's trying to rip the mic from your hands and you're still spitting your bars and somebody's going, like on a performance stage or, at a party, you're on the deck, somebody's waiting to spin some tunes. You've waited 2 hours to get on the decks and then you've just played like 2 tunes and somebody's like hovering around you as if they're going to get on. So there's like this sort of territory and, staking your claim on whatever equipment you're going to have your go and all that kind of stuff. So how does that marry into what you've said? Because like hip hop is everything, it's multifaceted, it's got the polar opposites to a lot of stuff, hasn't it? So just
I think competition oftentimes comes with this like negative framing, and I'm not saying that that's the framing that you're putting on it, but that's just what the world puts on competition, right? And I think competition in hip hop is a beautiful thing, and it's actually what allows for like collective elevation, right? So like if people are competitive and they want the stage and I only know I have it for a minute, then when I have my minute, it better be hard. So I better have prepared. I better have I have to come correct every time I get the mic. And that's why like in hip hop, people be like, when they hand you the mic, are you ready? Like, you just got to be ready to get it whenever the chance comes up. And I think, yes, it can feel territorial at times. People's egos can be really high when they're sharing out and they have something to say and they want their turn. But I think that's it's an invitation to bring like your best self to every opportunity you get to speak, which is cool that hip hop sort of asks us and demands that of us. But I also think it's then an opportunity to like, you could interrogate that, right? Like with a group, if you had like a jam session in your session and you saw those things manifest, people hovering over each other or whatever it may be, after it's done, like processing that with the group. Like, what did it feel like when you were performing and somebody else wanted to step up and get in there, right? Like, and actually talking that through. I think sometimes like we perceive even like competitiveness as like this negative thing. People might love that. People might feel encouraged by the competition more than maybe they're saying. But they might also not. And so let's process that and work on it and then redefine as a group like how we want to present ourselves moving forward in this type of a jam session example, right? So there's always opportunities to process competition and work through ego, even in spaces like this. But I also think that they're an attribute, they're an asset as well.
Yeah, it allows you opportunity to bring your best game.
Yeah, that's
Pull
it.
out your little
Yeah,
rockets.
that's it.
Okay, thank you so much. So, what are the external factors that could help deliver a good therapeutic hip hop workshop? So, I'm thinking about systems, funding, commissioners getting it, things like that.
Yeah. So I think like some base level of funding is always helpful. You don't need tons and tons and tons of money to develop a program, though, right? I think that needs to be clear. There's so many applications now that are free online where you can record. People are making hit records on their phones, right? Like, I do think that there's value in like designing a physical space with youth. So a lot of my work has been like, hey, let me go to a school, let me go to a clinic, let me find an unused closet with some, boxes in it.
Like
Let's
JT
pull it
Hall
out.
in the
Yeah.
broom cupboard at school.
Yeah, let's reimagine what this room looks and feels like. And let's hang up. What color foam do you want to get? Like, let's go online, let's purchase some foam, let's get a mic stand. You want to take some pictures, put them up on the walls, you want some LED lights, like let's do that. Like, actually tricking out a space is a helpful thing to create that environment. So I think that's a really good resource. And it doesn't need to be like $1 million space. You could build a space on the low, and that's okay, right? It's more that it's youth created or not even just youth, but whomever the participants are. It's participant created, and that I think has, in my opinion, more value than just going to another space that's like all the bells and whistles. Like, I'd rather create my own space and trust that the folks I'm working with know how to do that. And then I think in terms of support, hip hop is always, what hip hop reminds me regularly is that we don't wait for permission. So I'm going to start in whatever space makes sense for me to start. So I always go back to school-based work because that's where my expertise are. If I'm like, hey, tell my principal I want to start a new program, and they're like, okay, well, why don't you do like an after-school club? And that doesn't meet my initial expectations, I'm going to do that after-school club. And I'm going to get so much youth engagement and interest from that after-school club that then I can go to the principal and be like, hey, look how many young people are down. How can we make this more formalized during the school day next year? So hip hop is all about like making enough noise and getting enough like support and following that people would look silly if they did not pay you attention.
Yeah.
That's a hip hop sensibility, right? Like, just make enough noise and do it from that little closet that you created in the school, right? Like, it's oftentimes from the home studio to the world, right? And I think that's a hip hop way or path. And so I would chart the same path. Find whatever money you have. Even if you got $50 to get a USB mic that you plug into your computer and you download beats online and throw them in GarageBand, start wherever you want to start, but start. Because once you start, then the momentum builds, and then you figure out cool things to do, and then more people come and gravitate, and then you build and you build and you build, and eventually you're going to be in a place where you can pitch for the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing. And I think that's what it's all about. It's just continuous like evolution and building, whether or not there's people in support, right? Because like, it doesn't, as long as the youth are there, right? Like, then, or the participants are there, then that's what matters, right? And that's, in my experience, never been the issue, right? The engagement from clients has never been the concern. It's been the administrators or the folks above that question, right? And so the best way to prove it is just to do great work and get people that support it.
Yeah, part of doing great work is shouting out about it, isn't it? Which is why we're doing this podcast, to show how it can be done and to show ways to shout out.
Oh,
so
yeah.
We're past halfway now, moving into the last section. So when I think about barriers, what barriers might stop you from offering a good therapeutic hip hop workshop?
Yeah, again, I think we've talked about some of these. I think when there's an expectation that is too rigid about what the goal is supposed to be, or how we're going to get there, um, when there are specific expectations around how hip hop can be presented, like if people are like trying to control language or expression with rules about, you know, what that's supposed to look or sound like. If there are limitations that are put on hip hop or perceptions placed around hip hop about like what is good and what is not good, ways
All I
of
can
show.
hear right now is NWA lyrics, and imagining the
Yeah,
school principal going, "No, you can't say that."
yeah. And I think, you know, I think there's nuance, right? Like when I'm in session, I want all of the expression, right? So then I can have a dialogue with the participants about, all right, so we have this showcase coming up. How and what, like, how are we going to present and what are we going to present that then in that venue is going to be acceptable? And oftentimes I'll use real world examples. Like, y'all know, like, there's a clean and an explicit version of every song that comes out on the radio, right? Like, so there are venues where we have to be thoughtful about how we present the work. You know, and so there's partly that, but then I think there's a lot of like, unless we let youth like present the like stereotypical versions of hip hop that oftentimes they do the first time they enter the work, they just like perform what they think they're supposed to perform to be hip hop. Then unless we allow that to happen, then we can never get to the critical discussion that allows for them to explore other instances or other versions of hip hop, to try out different flows, to share different stories, to try out different languages, right? And so if there's a hard and fast rule about no NWA in this example, or in New York City right now, no drill, in London too, probably, right? Like no drill, then like you can't, if that's the rule, then we're gonna prevent youth from even coming because they're gonna be like, oh, I can't do my thing there.
It's like saying, "Hey, rainbows, we're gonna have no red in these rainbows for this."
Yeah,
You can come with your rainbows, but we ain't ever no red.
Exactly. And so I think we have to open it up and then get into the crevices and explore different things. But it's only when we allow it all to come to the surface that we can further explore.
That's a good way of putting it. Thank you. So looking back to when you began this work, can you tell us one or two things that would have helped you measure the impact of your work better or more easily?
I think remembering that everything is data, right? Everything is showcasing impact, right? Like I wish that I would have audio recorded my own reflections after every instance of working with people about the things that I saw that made me excited, or a quick little story about, oh my God, but this kid did this one thing and the reaction from these other folks, it was unbelievable. Like I wish I could have just recorded those instances and used that. Oftentimes it's framed as like anecdotal and not actual research, but that's BS. It is, right? And so how do we, I think knowing that, right? Every conversation I have with a parent or some other person that is proximal to the client that shares something about them, like that's evidence, right? And gathering that, because it helps then advocate for the continued growth of the work, right? And I think like that's something I would tell myself, right? You know, I didn't really think about research. I didn't see myself as a researcher because research always felt like this very like statistically laden task, you know, that was like the antithesis of the work of the practitioner. But I think we're all researchers and practitioners, right? Like the ability to evaluate the effectiveness of our work is a practical skill, right? And so I think like remembering that, that's something that I would have reminded myself. And to constantly reflect on my own biases. Hip hop's changed so much since the time that I first started doing it. And I've always resisted like the newest version of hip hop. You know, at one point it was like Big Sean and Wiz Khalifa, and now it's like drill, right? And so it's like, it's changed over time. And I've always been like, well, this isn't what I love, you know? And so I think constantly reworking, and I think I practice my own like self analysis and reflection better now than I did when I first started. I'm sure we all can say that. And so I think I'd remind myself to constantly challenge myself as well, while doing the work, because hip hop is going to change right before our eyes, and we're going to have to be able to adapt to how it's changed.
And that's because young people change right before our eyes.
Exactly.
And we're never going to have the same generation come that's passed already, and they're not going to have the same taste or flavors. And yeah. Thank you so much. So last couple of questions now. What guidance do you wish you had before starting to help improve your evaluation skills? So if you had a mentor telling you one or two things, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have shared the same thing. I wish I would have had somebody to talk to. Like if I did my own recording after session, I wish I would have had somebody that was like a really great like writer at the moment to like document and help me write about all of the stuff that I was doing in the moment. I wrote a lot about my work later. And I think if I was writing about it more like in the moment that it was happening, I would have captured it differently. So I think just having somebody like readily available to write and reflect on the work would have been helpful. To go after grant funding as well, using the work that had been happening in the moment, or the data that we had in the moment, would have been helpful.
So would you have used the grant funding for something in particular?
I think growing the program, engaging in potential training, getting some like interns, right? Like I'm a school counselor educator now, and I send a lot of my interns to practicing school counselors to do their internships. I would have loved to have gotten somewhat like compensated positions for school counselors in training to come work in the studio space with me, and learn about the work and implement the work. And so I would have loved to have like thought about the expansion of the work while I was doing it practically, versus now where I'm thinking about the expansion of the work from the college, which is the normal way that these systems are set up. And I still have access to schools and work in schools, but not in a full-time capacity like I once did. So it would be nice to that would have been cool to like do some on-site training as I was working.
Thank you so much. So last question now. What would a job description look like for a general therapeutic hip-hop practitioner? So we're just going to come up with 5 things that you would put in your person spec for a therapeutic hip-hop facilitator.
Yeah, love for hip-hop, right?
Yep.
Just like constant love for hip-hop.
1.
Ability to identify and connect with like local, like geographical instances of hip hop, open mic nights, ciphers, like local events, can go to those.
2. So 3.
Yeah, networking abilities, like ability to connect with local artists, form partnerships with local artists and communities. I think grant writing abilities, particularly like for art space things, to get folks compensated to support the growth of the work. And then I'd say like research and evaluation skills, right? Like ability to assess the effectiveness of your work. Those are 5 quick ones. If I had more time, they might change, but those are my 5 off the top.
Yeah, we want the off the top ones. And just as you said that, the cat in the background has started to wake up, and you can just see a little fluffy face, a little head in the background. But as it's nighttime here, coming up to 9 o'clock, you can't really see much. So this has been Glowitheflow podcast with Dr. Ian Levy. We'll be publishing our podcast transcripts and using the data as a piece of formal research to grow the practice and hopefully inspire people training in this field to use some of the tips and some of the anecdotes and tales from the ground, from grassroots practice from people such as yourself. So thanks, Ian, for coming along. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and have a great afternoon, evening or morning to our listeners wherever you're tuning in from. Big ups and stay safe.